looking at the current landscape and future trends. We have 4 experts here with us in international education, and I want to thank each of them for sharing their expertise with us today. Thank you, Anna, Gabriela, Joann, and Karin for joining us as part of this panel. Anna is the Regional Educational Advising Coordinator for the Andean region, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Environmental Studies and International Relations and 2 Masters in Political Science and Public Administration from U.S. institutions. Anna lived in the U.S. for 12 years before returning to Ecuador. She has worked both in the U.S. and Ecuador in the public and nonprofit sector on issues related to international relations, including international education, for more than 6 years. She has worked for EducationUSA for over 9 years, and prior to joining EducationUSA, she worked as the International Relations Advisor to the Minister of Higher Education in Ecuador. Gabriela Zelaya is a Global Education Team Leader for the U.S. Commercial Service, U.S. Department of Commerce Global Education Team, a position she has held since 2014. In this role, she manages U.S. Commercial Service Education Team programs that assist U.S. educational institutions with promotion and recruitment efforts. She also oversees U.S. commercial service collaboration with partners, both domestically and abroad. With more than 15 years in the field, Gabriela was recently honored as Silicon Valley's 40 Under 40, recognizing her as an up-and-coming leader in Silicon Valley for her leadership, community work, and impact in her respective field. Gabriela led the creation of Study California to promote international education opportunities in the state, and is co-creator of USA, a study destination, national engagement to promote the United States as a study destination. Gabriela received her bachelor's degree in political science, law, and society from the University of California, Riverside, and master's with honors from the University of Miami. Joann Hartmann is the Senior Director for International Enrollment Management, International Student and Scholar Services, and Volunteer Engagement at NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. In her capacity, Joann provides strategic leadership, development, and implementation of professional development opportunities, applications, and programs. She also has oversight for maintaining effective regulatory practice relationships with federal agencies that regulate mobility and enrollment of international students and scholars. Prior to NAFSA, Joann was at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, directing and managing the Student and Scholar Services Unit. She has written training curriculum, presented workshops and sessions at national and international conferences, and holds an MS in communication from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And finally, Karin Fischer is a correspondent for the Chronicle of Higher Education, where she writes about international education, colleges, and the economy, among other topics. She also publishes a popular weekly newsletter on global education, Latitudes, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, EdSource, and the Washington Monthly. She's a research associate at the Center for Studies in Higher Education at the University of California, Berkeley, and an international education leadership fellow at the University of Albany. She's a recipient of the East-West Center's Jefferson Fellowship for Reporting in Asia and the International Reporting Project Fellowship. Her work has been honored by the Education Writers Association, the National Press Foundation, and the Poynter Institute. So thank you all for spending some time with us and sharing your wonderful insights. We'll have time for questions at the end. So make sure for all the people who are attending and you have any questions for any of the panelists, we will be managing the questions at the end after the last panelist finished. So you can start typing your questions if you have any in the Q&A section. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Anna.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a short presentation. So there you go. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here today and talk a little bit about what's going on worldwide. I would like to start my presentation talking a little bit about EducationUSA for those institutions that might not be familiar with the program. I want to make sure that everybody knows who we are and how we can help you. So EducationUSA is a U.S. Department of State network that promotes U.S. higher education to international students around the world. And we also provide services to the U.S. higher education community to help you meet your recruitment and internationalization goals. We promote U.S. higher education by connecting international students to American institutions. We support the U.S. higher education community internationalization through international recruitment and retention plans. And we promote all accredited U.S. institutions equally. We also engage on the ground with foreign institutions and governments regarding their student mobility to the U.S. We do all this work through a network of advising centers, and we are located in 175 countries and territories. We have over 430 centers worldwide that house over 550 EducationUSA advisors. And the advisors are on the ground working with students, connecting students with US institutions. We also have a network of regional educational advising coordinators. I am one of 15 REACs, as we're known. REACs are also on the ground. We have a regional multi-country portfolio, and we provide direction, subject matter expertise, and training to the EducationUSA advisors. We make sure that the EducationUSA centers have all the resources they need in order to provide our services. We also provide strategic guidance to the U.S. higher education community on what's going on the ground. And we advance the State Department public diplomacy efforts. So when we talk about students, what do we mainly do? We focus on finding the best fit for every student that we work with. We do this by offering sessions and presentations, and also one-on-one and group advising and cohort advising programs, guiding students through all the steps needed in order to get accepted and go to do their studies in the US. We also provide pre-departure orientations to make sure that the transition to their US experience is a smooth one. To the US higher education community, we focus on maximizing your internationalization goals. We make sure to offer you advice about recruitment strategies depending on the region and the country that you're interested in. We offer information about local education systems and degrees, and also about opportunities that we identify on the ground. And we assist you in case you want to engage with local education institutions. And finally, we love to do joint programming with higher education institutions so that you can connect with our local students. Now I would like to talk about the current landscape and a little bit of the perspective of the EducationUSA network. To begin with, I just want to briefly put this chart with numbers. These are the Open Doors report from last year. Came out in November 2020. And of course, these numbers do not reflect a pandemic, but this gives us an idea of where we were prior to COVID-19. We were already seeing a decline overall of 1.8%, with perhaps Sub-Saharan Africa seeing an increase if we look at the breakdown from regions. But overall, we did see over 1 million students that were studying in the period of 2019 to 2020. The new report will come out next month, and it will be very interesting to compare the new numbers with these numbers and see what the impact of the pandemic has been based on the Open Doors report. Now, what we see on the ground, the current landscape that EducationUSA sees on the ground, we see that students continue to be very interested and motivated to study in the US. And how we see this is by the reach that we were able to have during 2020 and 2021. Education USA, for the most part, has been focusing on virtual programming. Depending on the region, some countries might have had or have already some in-person activities, but in general, Education USA went online. And we were able to not only maintain the current students that we work with, but also have a bigger reach. And what we saw on all our virtual programming was an increase of students that were interested and that were interested in studying in the US. So you can see the numbers there, 496,000 webinar participants in the events that we host. It's quite a big number of students that we are currently in contact with. So we also saw a growing interest in online programming and hybrid programs. Online was interesting because perhaps some parts of the world, students were in a better position to switch to an online mode of education. But in other parts of the world, it took some time. But what we have seen in the past year and almost 2 years is that students now feel comfortable with an online option, and not only feel comfortable, but see some benefits to that. So the current landscape is still a landscape of students that are interested in this type of programs. But we do see that overall students want to go to the States. They want to have that in-person and that US experience. So that's also why hybrid programs offer perhaps the best of both worlds. And I think there's a great potential for promoting this type of programs globally. So overall, it's a positive landscape that I'm painting for you. But of course, we know that it's been also a very challenging time. 2020 and 2021 is still with the impact of the pandemic. Not surprised here. The economic impact has had a direct impact on the students' ability to study in the US. We do see that in a lot of countries, currency devaluation has made it hard for students to afford their studies abroad. And so students are considering other options. They're probably looking more for affordable options at home or regionally. They're looking for scholarships. They're looking for ways to lower their costs. And so this is also why some students might be choosing other destinations as well because of cost and trying to find affordable options. We do see that students continue to have concerns about health and safety measures in the US, and also whether they're welcome at US institutions and on campus. So definitely waves of COVID-19 in different states do create some anxiety among students, as well as news about violence on campus or near campus in different parts of the states. So if you ask me, these are the two main things that you need to focus on when you talk to students and when you try to recruit students. Number one, the economic aspect. Education USA works very hard in trying to explain students the wide variety of options that exist in the US, moving away from the myth that the US is too expensive and it's not affordable for my pocket, and trying to explain that there's so many different options. But you need to help us explain this as well and try to explain to the students how they can afford your institution. And the other point is this part of welcoming environment and also safety, making sure, how are you making sure that international students feel safe when they arrive on campus and they feel welcome? And finally, of course, visa issuance. This was a huge issue in 2020 with lots of students very frustrated because they couldn't get a visa appointment. This has improved quite a bit in 2021, but we're still seeing some issues, and we're still seeing in some part of the world that students are having a hard time getting on campus on time for their studies. This hopefully will continue to improve in 2022, but it is definitely still a main concern. If we look at the future, I think for Education USA, if we look at the short-term future, we are thinking about the same environment that we're currently in. The economic environment will continue to push students to look for more affordable options, and they're looking for more funding opportunities. So this will continue to be the case for several years, obviously depending on certain parts of the world. Students and their economies might be able to bounce back a little bit faster than in other parts of the world, but it's definitely an overall concern of students. We do see quite a big potential for 2+2 models in several parts of the world. For example, in the Western Hemisphere, in the American continent, we see a great potential for these kind of programs, as well as in the East Asia Pacific, not only because of the affordability option, but also the flexibility that these type of models offer to students. Demographic changes were already playing a role prior to the pandemic and will continue to do that in the near future. We see that in some parts of the world, the student population is shrinking. In other parts of the world, it might be increasing quite a bit. So for example, in the African continent, there's quite a bit of a boom and maybe more opportunities for recruiting there. Also, several countries might not be ready for this boom, and so their local higher education systems might not be able to absorb the amount of students that are in need. So there's a potential there as students are looking to study abroad. We also are already seeing this, and we'll continue to see this in the future, that students are looking more than just earning a degree in the States. They want that added value experience. And what do I mean with this? They want to have things that they can put on their CV, from work experience, internships, volunteering, anything extra that they can put, that it's not only the academic program that they are enrolled in, but what else can they be doing while they're in the States or while they're enrolled in a program in the States. So you need to think about that and what other things can your institution offer, research opportunities for undergraduate students, anything that is an added value to the academic program that they're studying. And finally, also short-term programs and vocational programs might be of more interest as well now, as students are trying to, again, get a leg up in their work experience so they can land a good job. So this is what we are seeing if we are giving you a forecast for the future. I'd like to leave you with, again, what can we do to help you? What can Education USA do to help you? I want to make sure that you know that we have a website full of resources, and you can create a free account there. And for example, get our monthly newsletter where you get information on what is going on worldwide, and also what major Education USA activities are happening. You should contact the REACs. You can email me and I can put you in contact with my colleagues, or once you create an account on our website, you can access that information as well. Or contact an advising center just to get more information on what's going on and how you can recruit on the ground. You can contact our network to find out how to engage with us as well. As I mentioned, we have so many different online events these days, and we're always looking to do joint programming. We are attending conferences, and so that's a great way to connect with us, and we're in major conferences during the year. Or you should engage with us at our conferences, the Education USA Forum, or the regional forums that we have a couple of times a year. And finally, interact with us via our social media accounts. And to just finalize my presentation, I want to make sure that you know that on our website, we have some resources for you that are there for you. We have a global guide that comes out every year where we highlight profiles, trends, opportunities of what's going on all around the world. We also have a link to the Open Doors report. As you know, the Open Doors report is funded with the State Department funding and implemented by IAE. And we also have on our website the student mobility fact and figure sheets. We do these snapshots of every country where Education USA operates. And so it's a nice resource for you to have and find out what's going on in that specific country. With that, I'll just leave you there for a second, my email address, and turn over to Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Ana. Thanks for a great presentation, even predicting the future. Now, back to you, Gabriela. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my slides here. A minute here. Hopefully you can see that. First time I'm actually doing this with Zoom. So before we begin, I do have a couple of poll questions. If you see that on your screen now, just want to get a sense of who here as the audience has worked with the U.S. Commercial Service and a variety of our programs, as well as what you will be planning for this new fiscal year in terms of recruitment, what regions you're looking to recruit in or develop partnerships in. So if you can take a minute and submit responses for that, thank you very much. And I'll go ahead and also begin my presentation here. So hello again, and thanks to Fernando at Michigan Language Assessment for inviting me to take part in this wonderful 2-day virtual event on promoting collaboration to enhance international student recruitment and support services in higher education. Again, my name is Gabriela Zelaya, and I'm the Global Education Team Leader for the Global Education Team at Commerce. I am within the International Trade Administration, or ITA, a bureau of the U.S. Department of Commerce. I will be sharing information on U.S. commercial service and trends in education service exports. So at ITA, our mission is to work to improve the global business environment and help U.S. organizations compete at home and abroad. ITA is organized into 3 distinct but complementary units: global markets, whose focus is on promoting U.S. exports, advancing and protecting U.S. commercial service interests overseas, and attracting inward investment into the United States. So under the umbrella of global markets is the commercial service, and we serve as the export, trade, and investment promotion arm of ITA. We also have industry and analysis, whose focus is on producing in-depth, high-quality trade analysis, creating and implementing innovative trade and investment strategies, and implementing U.S. trade policy. We also have enforcement and compliance, which ensures a level playing field for U.S. industries by administering U.S. trade laws designed to defend against unfair trade and helping to ensure trading partners comply with existing trade agreements. Slide here. The Commercial Services Network includes over 1,350 trade specialists at U.S. embassies and consulates in over 75 countries and at 100 locations across the United States. So we do have a domestic network. Our clients include intensive English programs, private high schools and boarding schools, academies, community colleges, four-year colleges and universities, graduate programs, education service providers, education products, and technology providers. The U.S. Commercial Service is a business development operation, building a recruitment pipeline and partnership channels for U.S. organizations through the various program offerings unique to the education sector. Within the International Trade Administration, of course, is the Global Education Team, composed of trade specialists with education industry expertise that work closely with US-based educational institutions and education-related companies to assist with and offer customized programs and services abroad to foster US education service exports. So according to the Education Service Exports information from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Education Service Exports number for the 2020 calendar year notes educational service exports ranked as the 6th largest services export at $37.35 billion for the United States, with a trade surplus of $30.85 billion, making education service exports a very valuable export for the United States. BEA also tracked a new education services category under personal, cultural, and recreational services. In this category, BEA is tracking exports and imports of online education, correspondence education, and U.S. teachers teaching abroad. So in 2019, the U.S. exported $2.3 billion in education services under this new category, and we had a trade balance of $626 million. The U.S. imported $1.7 billion in education services under this new category. So when 2021 data is released, we will be creating one education group combining education exports and imports of both these services under the travel for education purposes and personal, cultural, and recreation services categories. And we will be reporting one combined number for exports and one combined number for imports. So more to come on that when we release our numbers through the Bureau of Economic Analysis. I'd also like to touch on a few of the services that the commercial service provides upon request. These are programs that we provide in person under normal circumstances, and some of these have been adapted to be offered in a virtual setting. So if you're familiar with these, hopefully you've marked it on the poll question there, but the initial market check, or IMC, is an initial assessment of the market potential of a client's program or service that gathers feedback on that program or service from industry participants. The International Partner Search, or IPS, is a personalized overseas search of interested and qualified partners in specific countries on behalf of a U.S. organization. So the commercial service prepares a report of up to 5 potential prospects that have expressed interest in a program or service that's being offered by a U.S. institution. The Gold Key service, these are pre-screened appointments to meet with prospective recruitment partners, government and industry officials, and U.S. embassy officials in order to help you determine whether an overseas company or individual is a suitable partner. The commercial service can also conduct a background check on those foreign partners, and that is what we call the International Company Profile. We also offer virtual education fairs where we invite up to 6 U.S. institutions to present their programs to potential partners in a country or region, and these programs are offered throughout the year. We also help arrange single school promotions at the U.S. embassies and consulates or hotel locations. A single school promotion is a reception where the commercial service invites target industry contacts at U.S. Embassy on a U.S. Embassy letterhead to join and learn more about your programs and services. So the commercial service helps with the logistics of the event and invites attendees and the foreign media. And these services are recommended for program launches, networking receptions with potential partners, or as a recruitment seminar. We also develop our education trade missions to countries overseas, where we take a delegation of U.S. schools to engage in meetings, networking, and receptions in country with potential partners and government officials overseas. And those who are relying heavily on your websites to recruit and develop partnerships, we do conduct the website globalization review, where the commercial service can evaluate your websites from the international perspective and provide search engine optimization recommendations. So that's something that you can also partake in. And just to move on here, we have, as far as insights on the current landscape and future trends, our commercial service post in India conducted an education market assessment in July, consisting of a 2-state survey of education advising agents and private counselors that captures their assessments on the preferences, current sentiments, and likely future trends for students pursuing education abroad. India being that it's the 2nd largest center of international students to the United States. Some of these findings included that the US remains as a top preferred destination of study, offering hybrid models of instruction continue to be important with both in-person and online. Offering optional practical training, or OPT, continues to be highly sought after, very important as well. Promotion of the cost savings models. For example, the 2+2 models with 2 years in community college plus 2 years at a 4-year university, granting degrees that also remained important moving into the future for cost savings. As far as trends and digital strategies for recruitment, we surveyed our global commercial service posts and found that there was a rapid adoption of digital platforms, as we all know, for example, for social, for research, for job searches. So students are doing all of that online. Streaming as well is very important. We also found that a number of institutions are conducting their outreach, of course, online, relying heavily on digital strategies for recruitment as well. You can find specifics on digital strategies for recruitment on our trade.gov site /digital-strategies-US-education. And we should have an overview of all of the questions we asked around this survey. Something that is very important to highlight as well, our ITA Global Education team launched the USASA Destination, an initiative that is aimed at boosting U.S. education exports by promoting the United States as a premier destination for international students to study. Key elements of the USASA Destination Initiative include providing tools and a platform for study state consortia to address challenges faced by increased global competition in the international education sector, and to foster economic growth, working to convene public and private partners to develop promotion, recruitment, and market entry strategies. This will enable the U.S. to better compete against other countries working to recruit international students as part of their national economic strategies, providing opportunities for study state consortia to participate in programming sponsored by ITA and the commercial service aimed at increasing U.S. education service exports. And within states, our goal is to form U.S. international education stakeholder roundtables with commercial service education specialists, convening meetings with study state consortia leadership and key stakeholders to develop plans and funding opportunities to market each state as a destination for study, encourage data collection on international education's economic impact and jobs data, develop video streaming and social media content, support inbound and outbound delegations, of course, post-pandemic, support strategic education trade fairs and connections with foreign education industry representatives. This month, we are launching our global marketing campaign for USA, a study destination. To view a list of the study states, please visit our trade.gov site for more on that. And I want to make sure that you are aware that U.S. schools can find comprehensive country-by-country trends, opportunities, digital strategies to recruit in over 55 markets on our 2021 Education and Training Services Resource Guide. This resource can be requested as a PDF copy from your local education specialist. You may also find individual country reports on our trade.gov website. Again, this guide includes charts on best prospects by country, as well as best recruitment methods by country. And we are offering USA Study Destination Virtual Connection Program with Middle East and North Africa. Schools will be able to schedule one-on-one meetings with agents, counselors, university partners, foreign corporations, foreign government officials from across the Middle East and North Africa region. Virtual meetings will take place through the new My Business Matches platform. So don't miss this very important program for the industry. We are also organizing Trade Winds, which is the largest U.S. government-led trade mission featuring meetings with U.S. commercial service diplomats from over 20 countries in the Middle East and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa regions. This will include conference programming and plenty of networking. And this is just a snapshot of our website that you can visit for more resources, and definitely reach out to myself, Gabriela, for any resources that we mentioned here today, or to make sure that you are in contact with our local education specialists here in the United States. And thank you, and back to our hosts.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thanks a lot. We posted your resources. Did you see the results of the poll? Do you want to share those results? Seems that main areas, like regions of interest, would be in the Middle East, North Africa, Latin America, Indo-Pacific region as well. So we'll be busy with lots of requests from different institutions probably.
Thank you. And I see that you dropped the resources links. Thanks so much for that.
That's
in the
right.
chat there. Perfect.
Well, thanks a lot. Moving on then, Joann, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fernando. I do appreciate the opportunity, Fernando, and also to Sharon and Michigan English Language Assessment for having NAFSA here with this wonderful panel. Thanks to Gabriela, Anna, and Karin on this panel with information to share. Again, my name is Joann Hartmann. I'm the Senior Director for IEM, ISSS, and Volunteer Engagement at NAFSA. So good to see some familiar faces in the chat and the participant list. So welcome. And this is a good afternoon of sharing trends. I think you'll hear some of the trends and future insights are quite similar. I'd like to start with, 3 Ps, if you will: policies, platform or playing field, and the people. So first, to do with policies, I'll highlight some recent developments that have happened. Many of you have read already the Department of State and Department of Education issued an important joint statement of principles on supporting a renewed commitment to international education. The shared commitment to promoting international education is a long-awaited and much welcome step in welcoming international students and scholars to the U.S. We've urged the Biden administration to establish a coordinating body to ensure collaboration, development, and implementation of actionable items and steps from this renewed commitment to international education, and we continue that advocacy work. We're also excited about the reconvening of the Homeland Security Academic Advisory Council, or HSAC. If you get Karin's Latitudes newsletter weekly, she reported on it yesterday as well. NAFSA made significant contributions and recommendations in the previous HSAC under President Obama. HSAC provides advice and recommendations to the Secretary and senior leadership on key issues across the Homeland Security enterprise as they relate to educational settings, institutions, and academic activity. So we are excited about that and looking forward to the work that will fall under HSAC and again in smoothing the process for international students. The Biden administration also announced travel restrictions to be eased in November. We don't have any details yet at this time. We understand travel restrictions have created a huge burden on schools and programs for incoming international student and mobility. The expansion of the visa interview waivers for Fs, Ms, and Js under certain conditions also was a welcomed announcement from the State Department. Another highlight is that the Department of Homeland Security withdrew the proposal to eliminate duration of status, or DS as it's commonly known, and all of US practitioners know how important duration of status is to international students and their maintenance of status and staying on in the US. The Thrive Act snuck up on us unexpectedly. This act includes a provision that affects a school's use of agents to recruit international students. It essentially bans incentive-based compensation for international student recruitment, but we hear today that there's positive movement on getting a technical correction to this act. So we hope to see that correction coming any time soon, hopefully. Optional practical training, as Gabriela mentioned, remains an important thing that international student looks for when choosing to study in the US or not. That litigation continues, and we will continue to monitor and provide any updates through our web pages on any latest information with regard to the litigation. Continued reports of visa denials for students and scholars affiliated with the Chinese government or military. So again, we continue to collect information and liaise with our colleagues over at the State Department. Now, despite the friendlier administration, we're very grateful for the positive movements that have come thus far. Don't expect quick resolutions and fixes. Things can move slowly, particularly when there are other crises happening around the world. For example, we heard from our consular affairs liaisons that staff were being pulled to assist with the Afghan crisis. So that's really understandable, and so could cause ripples and delays throughout for international students and scholars as well. Understand the regulations, policies, and agency guidance, and set realistic expectations for your students, and know where your advising limits are if you need to refer them out. It is a changing landscape very, very quickly as far as policies at the national and federal level are. Now, on the state level and institutional policies wise, many of you have had to navigate, the vaccines, the mask mandates, and different types of policies for reporting on campus, living on campus, all those things that have happened at the state or local levels where you are. That has also changed. Test optional or test blind policies were quickly adopted, and it looks like some of them are here to stay. What are you doing about it with your test policies and admission policies? On to my second point of the playing field or platforms. The actors have changed. Students are savvy consumers. The rise of EdTech, including the use of artificial intelligence, agents, and aggregators or super aggregators, as they're being called, has also come on the scene. Use of AI to respond to the growing demands, as Gabriela and Anna have mentioned, use of agents to help with recruitment, and now aggregators in the EdTech industry are quickly coming onto the scene that changes a lot of the playing field. It's not just students, but institutions must also understand and know who and what the stakes are in this changed landscape. It's not a one-size-fits-all anymore, and there's not one solution that fits everyone. Institutions must understand the platforms, the channels available to help put their international enrollment strategy in action. Gabriela spoke about some that her unit hosts for institutions. There are options out there, but educating yourself about the playing field and who the players are and what suits your strategy is really all in your hands. Students must navigate the many layers of information to make their best decision. They're more connected. What is your school doing to support this process and this experience? Now, will we continue to see China, India, and Saudi Arabia as the top sending countries? As Anna showed you, the Open Doors, IIE Open Doors report. We're anxiously awaiting this year's snapshot that will come out in November during International Education Week. What are the geopolitics? Anecdotally, from what I have gathered from my colleagues in the field, they were pleasantly surprised that enrollment was up, relatively speaking. Some were up before 2019 numbers. So I think that bodes very well for the US higher education, international education sector. Now, on to my third point. In terms of people, we aren't the same people we were 18, 20 months ago. Now, reflecting on the current environment, what are the key takeaways and lessons learned? Many of you have had lessons learned. Now, how do you use that to build for a more sustainable future individually and collectively as a field? I think for me, my observations are grit, resilience. Many people had leaps of faith that helped us build a stronger community for our students and our scholars. The tough times continue. There continues to be furloughs, layoffs, and retention, despite some good enrollment indicators. They continue in the field. And so I have also heard from others who have reinvented their roles. We have taken on more and more. And what are we doing in terms of taking care of our people, our staff on campus? How are we providing for retention and morale as we work in a 24/7 connected world? Now, technology can provide access, but it won't replace the people-centered work we do to serve students. At least that's my hope, because we are a people industry. How can international educators better leverage technology to ensure successful outcomes for our students that we serve? Now, on the student side, you heard from Anna earlier too about what they want to look for, what they're looking for. They want their dreams and desires. Those have also changed, right? It's not just us, but the students have changed and they've been impacted by this pandemic. As mentioned earlier, they're savvier, they have access to information at their fingertips and are more connected than ever to peers and the world at large. They are also bolder, they care about social and environmental issues and place career outcomes as a priority, as you've heard from my colleagues as well. But how have you at your institutions accommodated these? What are the advising and career counseling supports that your schools have done to beef up that support for student goals? So the experience and the outcomes are a lot of what students are looking for. I hope I've provided some helpful context in terms of policy, the playing field or platform, and the people for us to have some intentional discussions as we chart this new landscape. Now I'll pass it over to Karin.
Thank you so much. Really interesting insights. Thank you, Joann, again. Karin, back to you then. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando, and thanks to all of my panelists, and thanks to all of you for being here. You know, it's always the risk of going last. I think, you know, all three, Gabriela, Anna, and Joann, have done a great job in kind of laying the landscape for international education, and particularly for international students. And so I'm going to just be a bit forward-looking. I'm certainly not claiming to have a crystal ball or offering any kind of forecast, but I thought I would raise some of these kind of big picture questions that we maybe ought to be thinking about in the field, both in the very short term and maybe in the kind of medium term. I think the first thing is to ask about what is COVID's ongoing impact going to be? You know, as other panelists have noted, I don't think we can take for granted that this is the end of COVID, particularly in international education, where we have mobility, but also a very mobile disease. And so, I mean, I think if you look, for example, at India, it's a great example with what happened there with its second wave, secondary severe wave of COVID. I think it maybe can offer some kind of insight into what can happen and how potentially mobility can be disrupted. When the second wave happened, we really saw everything in India kind of, or much in India kind of close up, including American consulates, just as visa processing was finally getting going. And so for the end of the spring, visas from India were running very far behind, you know, sort of expectations, and very far behind what had happened sort of pre-pandemic into the same time in 2019. And so I think it's just worth thinking about kind of the ongoing impacts of COVID. You know, others have mentioned open doors, and I think we are all waiting to see what those numbers are, but we actually already have a little bit of insight into this fall and what it looks like. You can see close to real-time data for visa issuances. There's not, unfortunately, data, at least there isn't as of this morning, on August, but we can see from May to July what was going on. And I think it's, and those are, you know, 3 of the 4 with August most critical months for visa issuances for fall semester. And we can see that the data, the issuance numbers were really running on par with what those same months were, in fact, a little bit ahead than the same months in 2019. And that is certainly heartening, and it reflects some of what you've heard before. The Biden administration's decision to, although the travel restriction is going to be lifted for international travelers in general in November, they put a policy out last spring for international students, many which sort of freed them up to have kind of a lot of consulates to really pay attention and to prioritize their visas being processed. A number of consulates sort of also intentionally said, this is what we're going to do this summer. We're going to get the visas through. Obviously, we had kind of more widespread vaccine availability. We also had the WHO recognize the key Sinovac. And so that changed kind of some policies here in the US on campuses when it came to vaccine mandates. And I think it just probably encouraged and made people more comfortable with traveling. So I think we have some reason to be pretty optimistic in the short term, but not to throw cold water on things. But I do think we should consider the fact that in some ways this demand, this visa trend reflects pent-up demand. In many cases, we had students who would have come to the US in fall 2020, but had to delay or had to take and defer or had to take classes remotely online. And they, along with those students who would have routinely been coming in fall 2021, were all in that visa pool this year, this summer. And so I think one of the real questions I have about COVID's long tail is, we know that international students and their families are typically making decisions about international study, about studying in the US. It's a long-term choice. They are not making it in the spur of the moment. And in fact, some of them in places like China are not just making that choice, but they're taking one path for which they really can't get back if they've not, say in China, if they've opted out of the national exam, the Gaokao, then they are really, their path is to study abroad. So I think one of the questions is going to be, what did COVID and it's the issues it raised about health and safety, about the ability to study remotely, even about issues like discrimination and anti-Asian violence here in the US. What does that do to the decision-making process for students who are making those critical choices during COVID? And then, of course, last I would say, as I started out by pointing out, there is continued volatility, and that just does not extend to abroad, but also here in the US. What is it going to look like if we as a country or regionally, again, have these bad outbreaks? How will that affect international students' choices? My next big question is, what are the factors beyond COVID that we have to be thinking about? I think it's worth remembering. I mean, and it's hard to, in light of what huge enrollment hits we took in international students during COVID, but I think it's worth remembering that international student enrollments had actually been falling, new international students enrollments, that is, had actually been falling for 4 years prior to COVID. And in fact, in 2019, we saw in the Open Doors numbers that overall enrollments fell. Not by a huge amount, by 2%, so small percentage. But I think it's worth remembering that there were other factors, and there will continue to be other factors affecting student choice beyond COVID. And the panelists have gotten at a number of those things. I think we need to think about health and safety, about things like gun violence, maybe about as Joann pointed out, about policies that affect students, some that affect particular groups of students, like some of the policies focused on Chinese graduate students, and even about policies that aren't aimed at students, but yet affect their perception of the United States. Things like the Justice Department's China initiative, looking at ties on the research level to China. I think we have to think about increased global competition, the ease of the migration pathway for international students, and things like the economy. I think COVID did take a hit, or hit a number of economies. They led to some currency devaluations. And then, I mean, we all have to, China's the elephant in the room for us, I think. And I think we've got to think about what is the economy in China, what's going on with that. I mean, we've seen the collapse of really a large property company, Evergrande. And I think it's spurred some worries about a property bubble in that country. Well, how do many Chinese families fund their children's education in the US? Through the value that's in their homes. And so what are all these other things besides COVID? What are they going to do to international enrollment trends? That said, I mean, that's sort of thinking about the things that could negatively impact them. But I think on the positive side of the ledger, we've got to think about what are some things that really could spur student interest. I think a sort of silver lining, perhaps, of COVID is, I think maybe it has made some students that much more sort of focused and dedicated on wanting to come and be physically here in the US to study, that they, just getting that degree online maybe wasn't enough for them. We've talked about the Biden administration's joint statement on its renewed commitment to international education. I think it's unquestionable that perceptions matter, and I think in some ways we can hope that statement and the sort of the fact we're at the highest levels of government broadcasting our commitment to international education and to international students in particular can go a long way. But as Joann laid out, I think we've got to look at how do the policies come to pass that put kind of meat on the bones of these policies, and how will that affect student mobility? one of the big questions I'm wondering about is how student recruitment will change in this post-COVID landscape. As others have noted, we've really been in a mode of kind of virtual recruitment. And I think that in the short term is probably going to continue. I think most institutions are not back to their regular kind of post-pandemic recruitment travel around the globe. But I think in the long term, my real question is, how much of what everybody's been forced to do during the pandemic will they retain? My suspicion is we're going to be in kind of a yes and sort of world that, yes, colleges may go back to doing a lot of the in-person recruitment that they did, but that we'll see that supplemented by some of these new practices. I think first, one reason is it's popular with students. It can be on their time and on their terms. And I think a lot of colleges have really invested in personal outreach to students through Zoom and WhatsApp and text. And I think they really like that. From colleges, I think every college I've spoken to has said one thing in common about while they grumble about, getting up at 3 a.m. to do recruitment events in China or in Asia, they will say, look, I've gotten students and I've gotten interest in applications from places that I never had visited. And maybe we didn't even really get students from in the past. And so I think that will make retaining some of this attractive. On the other hand, I think it's also quite likely that colleges will be, if they're doing that, they'll be in their mission staffs doing more with the same, or maybe even in some cases more with less. And so that's going to be a strain. I think in addition to virtual recruitment, I think there has been more interest in having an on-the-ground presence in countries. If one can't travel with one's recruitment staff, how can you still have a presence that students and their families can turn to? And so I think I've seen colleges hire their own admissions staff in key markets. I've seen some colleges engage much more intentionally with alumni who can be kind of their voice and the face of the college, maybe in a more robust way than they had in the past in terms of prospective student outreach. And of course, hiring agents. As Joann said, the Thrive Act, and its provisions about incentive compensation complicates that. And I think, as I reported a couple of weeks ago, it was alarming to see the Veterans Affairs Department begin to go forward and sort of signal that it was going to interpret that provision as kind of an intent of Congress. But it's also really heartening, I suspect, for many people, the news that we just heard about a technical fix being in the offing. I know we focused a lot on student recruitment. One of my other big questions is, what kind of support will colleges have for international students? I think COVID has underscored that this is an especially vulnerable population. We've had many students who have been stuck here in the US, unable with travel restrictions and health concerns to go home and see their families. And so I think we've got to wonder what is the long-term impact on that. And it's also stressful for students who've newly arrived here, but in the midst of an ongoing panic. I also think we can't, looking at the demographics of our international students, the majority of whom come from Asia, we have to keep in mind kind of the impact of the anti-Asian racism that has unfortunately been an outgrowth of the pandemic. And I think we know that international students, again, especially those from Asia, are often hesitant or have sort of cultural barriers to counseling. They're less likely to seek out mental health treatment, even though they are, again, the American College Health Association has singled international students out as one of the most vulnerable populations on campus. And so I think I will be watching to see how intentional colleges are about reaching out to students, about having more culturally responsive kinds of services. We know when students aren't turning to counseling or aren't turning to the International Student and Scholars Office, they're often turning to their classmates. And we know that these peer networks have been damaged by COVID as well. Just think about, the different student groups on campus. Some of them managed to keep going through the pandemic, but many of them, have not. And so, the people who were the leaders in the International Student Associations or the Indian Student Association, they may have graduated. And so how do those networks get rebuilt, and what can colleges do to support them? And again, I think it's inevitable we all talk about this through a COVID lens, but I think these are not just COVID problems. If you haven't seen it, ACE released a new compact report last spring that called for greater support for international students in and out of the classroom. And I think these are going to be ongoing issues. And then finally, just very quickly, I want to say, and this has been gotten at a little bit before, but will the definition of an international student change? And what do I mean by that? I think historically, how we see international students and how we define them is really by mobility. The education is here, and the student comes to the United States for it. The pandemic has certainly made it clear that it's possible to deliver online education around the globe. And I think in some measure, it may have lessened the sort of perception that online education is inferior in perception, both on the part of students and their families, but also from colleges and professors. And so what does that maybe signal for us in terms of how education is delivered in the future? Anna mentioned 2+2 programs, students starting their education in another country. I wonder if we will see more hybrid programs. Will we see fully online programs? Certainly Australia, where they have not been able to bring students back, has been very aggressive in offering those kinds of programs to its international students. Will we see potentially more in-country programs or regional programs where students can access education but not travel? And will that maybe be appealing both, as some other panelists have noted, economically, but also maybe be appealing for families that are reluctant to send their students so far away while they have these continued health and safety concerns? So I guess those are some big questions that I've been thinking about, but I know the other panelists would as well. Love to hear your questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Very inspiring questions and answers. Lots of great ideas. So we're open for questions. If the audience has any questions you would like Karin, Joann, Gabriela, or Anna to address, feel free to submit them through the Q&A. Just taking notes of a few of the things that you were talking about, and while we wait for a few more questions to come in, you were talking about, Karin, about global competition in some way. It's not, there are so many programs and different things that students can choose from at this point. It's more than just choosing among different options within the US. There are so many possible academic programs that they can really aspire for. What do you think, and it's not just for Karin, everybody mentioned that in some, to some extent through your presentations, what do you think we can do collaboratively on the one hand to make our offer more attractive to international students, more competitive, but also probably at the institutional level to be competing with other global programs that students might be interested in as well?
Yes, so I think you're right. We have seen it. Well, and I think I should say, first of all, it's not a zero-sum game. There are many, many international students, and there are many fine options for them. And so other countries gaining students is not necessarily America's loss, but sometimes it is. And so I think it's, I think, and I think you already heard this echoed, on the institutional level, it's becoming, I think colleges are becoming far, far more sophisticated in their research, in their market research about what is it that international students want and need? For some of them, their attraction to the US is about the kind of education that is distinctive to the American system, that sort of traditional liberal arts education. But for others, they are just as Americans are. They're thinking about the value add. What's the return on the investment? And so I think it's both about having on the institutional level, both the programs that appeal to students, but also thinking about the whole student life cycle. So not just how an institution is going to support students on campus, but how it's going to treat them as job seekers and alumni and support them in that sort of future going forward. And then I would just lastly say, of course, the issue is that it's not just simply institutional choices, but, as we've all talked about, it's also policy on the governmental level that affects, and not just the federal government level, but state levels too, that affects students' decisions. And of course, much of that is out of your control.
I'd like to add on to Karin's comments there. This is Gabriela again. And hopefully you noticed on our slides that we talked about USA as a destination, and that's, our U.S. Department of Commerce approach to helping the United States compete. So our agency does focus on helping industries compete globally. And so we are helping through the Steady State Consortia, organizing them kind of grassroots level through the states to make sure that they voice the importance of international education at the state level, that they're included at the table when it comes to export services and the importance of that, and included in the programming. And so with USA Study Destinations, kind of organizing the industry as a whole through the study states to make sure that the United States remain as that sought after brand. And with the global marketing campaign we're launching this month, it's going to run through April 2022. We are hoping to highlight each state as a destination of study, the unique types of programs that will be offered through not just video, but social media content as well. And so we are promoting also, of course, the quality of the education, the uniqueness, the diversity of the programs, but also kind of beyond the classroom experience for international students coming to study here in the United States.
Great point. Anybody else, Joann, Anna? Yeah, go
yes,
ahead, Anna.
I mean, I can add that just as Gabriela mentioned, the study destination, in a sense, what we try with Education USA is to open a little bit more the minds of students, because definitely students think that there's about a handful of institutions in the US, the most famous ones, and trying to explain to them the different options that exist and different destinations that exist. I think it's very important. And I think when we do a lot of joint programming with institutions, sometimes we ask institutions to talk about their state, to talk about not only their campus, but the community around them, just to give them an idea, because these are young kids that are traveling abroad. They want to envision themselves abroad. And so I think in a way, the US system is so large and amazing in that sense, but that's also one of the main issues that we have compared to other systems where there's less to choose from. We have so much, and so sometimes it's very overwhelming. One of the hardest things for advisors is to help these students find their best fit, as we call it, and move away from thinking of those few institutions that are famous and they know of.
Yeah, I also just want to echo that it's really about the student experience and that narrative that needs to be continued, right? To Karin's point, it's not just about schools attracting students and that return on investment, but it's also investing in the international student that you recruited on your campus for that support throughout the student life cycle of, whether they're a freshman or a senior, getting career counseling. I think that's where the focus also and that conversation needs to be, that makes it quite unique for the US in many, many ways. To Anna's point, over 3,400 institutions, right, in the US, and finding that right fit. So I think schools utilizing, Education USA, for example, or U.S. commercial services. Those are readily available resources that you can tap into. Their understanding of on the ground is important. But overall, once you recruit a student here, there needs to be a continuation of that student experience and that support and that narrative that needs to be continued.
Thank you, Joann. All of you mentioned in some way different changes, and students are bolder, they're better connected, they have different expectations. What changes have you seen lately in terms of demographics, or their different expectations you were asking for? They were more expecting the experience and the additional value and more than just a degree and finishing their education and moving on into another stage. What changes in the demographics or the student international student population recently have you noticed that higher education institutions should consider in order to offer better value, a better fit for their expectations?
I guess I can go first. In thinking about recruitment specifically, I think institutions could benefit from moving away of just giving a promotional spiel about their institution and perhaps giving students a little bit of a flavor of what to expect. So for example, if a student can sit in virtually now in this world in like a class, or get a sense of flavor of an academic course in that sense, experience it that way. I think this is what students want. They want to sort of feel they can do this. If you can give them like a short boot camp or something on something, even if it's paid, it's a great marketing tool. It gives the student the opportunity to use that as a credential, as, oh, I did this boot camp virtually with this institution. I can put that on my CV. Students are very much aware that it's not only about getting their bachelor's degree or getting their master's degree, is what they are doing in between during that time, away from just a classroom. So I think, for example, high school students, they're looking for, can I do some research during the summer? Can I intern during the summer? And so there opens up an opportunity with a virtual world that I feel now institutions realize, oh, I can do a lot of other outreach things with potential students that could be more interesting than just the typical brochure that you're just reading out. So I think these are the things that institutions can do that could benefit their outreach, their recruitment strategies.
Excellent. Thank you, Anya.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. So as we were evaluating the global marketing campaign to market U.S. programs here in the United States, of course, we want to be as inclusive as possible. And the feedback we received was that, the range in terms of student age and as a group is wide. It is very wide, starts as young as 13 years of age to older population. So we can't just market to a certain age group. It's got to be a wide range, a variety of programs offered as well, not just your 4-year degree programs, but you also want to market your short-term, summer experience types of programs. And of course, with English language as well, that resonates a lot in terms of the shorter term types of programs, your executive training programs as well. So we did find a lot of demand on the corporate level for training or workforce development, vocational training. That is what a number of foreign governments are looking for. And so, and the client overseas can range from an institution as a partner for those exchange programs to a company that is maybe state funded or just an independent company. So there is a wide range of where the student comes from, the demographic of the student. Of course, we have the high school student. Also, that population is growing here in the United States. So a number of students coming for their high school experience here. So we found out that it was a variety, and it needs to be kind of all inclusive from your very short term summer experience programs to, of course, the English training programs, executive training to 4-year graduate programs, and the demographic is wide range as well.
And some of this, where I have seen a change in how schools do outreach, not only through the pandemic that we're still in, is the inclusion of parents and family members, decision makers, right? With technology, I mean, parents can attend meetings with schools now. They're not excluded, whereas before, usually it's the student with the admissions counselor, but now it's open to anyone and everyone. One of my favorite stories is about, thesis or dissertation defense that used to be just the international student alone in the room with their faculty advisors and their committee. But now with online access, families are able to attend and celebrate that very key moment and that achievement with their student. So I think important to think about all around who those stakeholders are in the students' lives when you do outreach and when you talk about that narrative of the student experience.
Very good point. Yes. Joann, you were talking about policies, and we sometimes wonder what we can all do in some way. Of course, it's not up to each of us to do something about them, but all of us can contribute to get some things supported. Is there any kind of what recommendations do you have for higher education institutions, everybody that's participating here, intensive English programs? How can we contribute to those advocacy efforts and contributing to developing and supporting policies that are going to help international students find our U.S. destinations more attractive in some way, welcoming them, feeling safer, feeling really appreciated here?
Thanks for that question on advocacy. It's more important than ever. To Karin's point earlier, there are things we can control, things we can't control. So advocacy is something we can control as individuals and as institutions. So NAFSA partners a lot with, EducationUSA, USEEP, some of my friends and colleagues who are here too, in our advocacy work. So Connecting Our World is our platform where you can sign up for weekly emails that gives you updates on some of the key issues and things that we're working on and advocating for. There are at times a call to action that you can also join. We'll give you specific talking points. There are a lot of materials on our website, and I'll pop it into the chat shortly. But in terms of, again, politics, geopolitics, they play a big part in our sector. And I think it's important when you get the opportunity to comment. So for example, when there's a proposed rule being proposed and there's a comment period, we'll often put out a call for comments from folks. And that's when we saw last July, if you remember the infamous SEVP policy guidance that was issued, that took a lot of effort, and kudos to everyone who were, so outraged and enraged at what it was going to do to international students that they spoke up, that it was the highest number of comments received. So those are key moments when we put out calls to engage, to stay informed. Again, we have a connectingourworld.org platform that you can sign up for these weekly emails that keep you posted and updated.
Great, thank you. And Karin, you also mentioned a newsletter. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I dropped it in the chat. I write a free weekly newsletter that is, you have to subscribe, but that is all. So it's not a high bar. And so it's in there if you scroll up. One thing I would say about Joann's point is, I think sometimes it can be easy for people within international education to feel like it's all on them to advocate. And it's there are certainly allies, both institutionally within universities who can amplify the voices, but also that there are groups within the community who can do that as well. And one of the things, back to the SEVP guidance and how quickly it was overturned last summer, one of the groups that filed suit, in addition to Harvard and Princeton, who kind of led it, were a group of college communities, college towns, city governments that felt that they too were being affected by policies that would be bad for international students.
One of the questions that I wanted to bring up again. It was Karin's last question. The definition of international student, will that change? Will what consider international student change in the future? I wanted to know what the other panelists thought about that. So that was very interesting with the changing of the delivery options, what we're studying, who will be studying, who will be delivering that education. Does traveling is no longer necessary? Will we really define international based on the traveling component in some way, or how would you reconcile those different areas in terms of international education?
I can comment on that really quickly. I was just, smiling because we, at the onset of the pandemic, developed a number of webinars on resilience for the education sector. And one of the things that we spoke about was digital service taxes and value-added tax because of all of the online education that was being offered once everybody went online. And that's still considered a service export. It's still considered, a payment from a foreign entity here to the US. And so that covered the impact of receiving foreign funding or foreign monies for education programs. And so that was still considered, us working or delivering services to foreign entities. So that would still, online education is still considered probably an export, as I also noted, for the Bureau of Economic Analysis numbers and the categories that they are now counting towards international education service exports.
I mean, not to be cliche about it, I think the world is your oyster, right? In the education industry, as we look to the future overall, I think skills development, the skills and talents needed for the future is changing and different. And I think institutions would be remiss if they don't take a look at the longer term picture and strategizing about the different types of students that would be included, and not just traditional 18 to 24-year-old students that will come in person, sit their butts in chairs and listen to a lecturer in a 150-person class, right? That concept went out the window 18 months ago when everybody had to shift and pivot and do different things. So I think for micro-credentialing as an example is so strong now, right? So thinking through all those future needs and skills will help inform that strategy.
Yes, no, I was just going to say that I think what it means to have a US experience has definitely opened doors. I mean, the pandemic has opened doors to that. It was already happening where you have institutions maybe building relations with local institutions to offer different frameworks of programs. And I think this was happening, but now, as I mentioned, we see that students feel more comfortable, more open to this. So I think there's more potential for this. Institutional partnerships are a headache in a way. It takes a while for this to get started, but talking about medium-term goals, I think it's worth the investment because I see a lot of students perhaps starting their studies at home, but they still want to perhaps travel to the US. So making it easier for them to have a semester abroad, a meaningful semester abroad, an internship abroad, or maybe not even that, but perhaps they can do virtual classes as they were doing during the pandemic with an institution. So I think there's a lot, world is your oyster, there's lots of opportunities. And I think this forceful nature that we had to do everything online really opened up opportunities for the future for everyone.
Great. Final comments, if you were speaking on behalf of students that are coming or that are not coming to the US, to any institutions, what do you think they would tell our institutions today?
I would say, as an international student, I'd be very excited to experience the institution as well as all of the opportunities they have to offer, internships and everything else. I think that would be my take on that as an international student.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't think.
Yeah, and you're in a perfect position there. You're speaking from Ecuador today, right? But kind of representing all of Education USA. from the views of students that are either the students that are coming here or the students that are going somewhere else to other countries or to other institutions. What do you think their message would be if they're talking to our higher education institutions, intensive English programs, institutions here in the US? What do you think their main message is from the students directly to them today?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. I mean, the messages from students that are interested in studying in the US, what they would say to institutions in the States. I'm thinking a lot of the obstacles that students have or see is the application process. So again, making it as easier as possible to navigate the application process for them, from what credentials they need to give, what tests they need to get. I think this is the main concern. And if a student is talking to one of you, a prospective student, that's probably the main thing that they're going to be concerned. And it's also a big obstacle thinking about studying in the US, this idea that applying to the US is just too complicated compared to other countries. So I know that there's some definitely things that you need to have in place for admitting students, but the easier that you can make that process, the better.
Any other comments, suggestions, ideas?
I guess I would say simply that students, international students, want to feel seen, that both they want to feel like the institution has, their institutions have a sense of their particular needs and are serving them, but also, are listening to them and advocating for them. During the pandemic, a number of students said to me, just having somebody from the institute, from their college, reach out to them, even if they weren't, able to answer all their questions, because during COVID, that's been a real challenge. Nobody could say when the pandemic was going to be over or when visa processing was going to resume or anything, but just being heard and being seen, I think, is pretty important.
Very good point. Well, thank you so much. Karin, Joann, Gabriela, Anna, thanks for your valuable insights, great information, lots of good things to think about and start planning our next stage of student recruitment and new services and support services,